Hey there, it's Mario here, and in this video I wanted to share with you a couple of ideas on how to get sub 10% body fat level without tracking your calories and macros. And this has been an idea that I've been asked about a lot recently, especially since a lot of YouTube channels out there are starting to promote the fact that you don't need tracking, and they're really actually going against people who are tracking their macros, as simply calling them out as being obsessive compulsive or like controlled freaks, and you don't need that kind of thing, that you can simply do it without. I mean, it's definitely true that you can do without tracking, obviously. I mean, I'm living proof of that, because when I first started out, I didn't track macros and calories. I simply ate foods that a big guy in the gym told me will get me muscle, like cheese, a lot of protein from meat, and these kind of things, right? So it's definitely possible to get to your goal. And in this video I wanted to share with you what it really takes, and a little bit of an objective viewpoint on when to use tracking and when not to use tracking, and who is really the person that is asking me about it. So that last thing that I mentioned, a lot of people that asked me, okay, how do I get ripped without tracking, are simply people who are not willing to put in the effort to learn what macros and calories are, what food really is. They're not willing to spend a couple of days learning how to read nutrition labels, maybe set up MyFitnessPal, which takes 5 minutes, and they're simply not willing to put in that effort. And first off, I mean, if you put that effort, this is a skill that will translate into you knowing how to manage your nutrition for the rest of your life. And it's something I don't understand. I mean, I understand that people don't have time, they don't have the will, but I never really understood people who don't want to learn new skills. And that's kind of disturbing. I mean, I know that I don't judge. There's various different kinds of people. Someone just doesn't want to learn. Someone just wants a cookie cutter thing to follow, and they simply don't want to bother themselves with, which is fine, right? But one thing is clear, right? We know from evidence, we know from empirical evidence, we know from experience that tracking calories and macros is the fastest, most optimal, and best way to get to your goal, right? I'm not necessarily saying that you have to account for everything up to a gram, but having that level of mindfulness and really having that log, having that journal of food where you hit different ranges of macros and keep an account for your calories is definitely the best way to get your result, right? The most effective way. But going further is like, who is this approach is maybe not optimal for? Is someone who doesn't necessarily want to get ripped. Like, let's say someone wants to just get a little bit of that six-pack. I mean, they want to be healthy. They just want to, I guess, they simply want to train and enjoy the process. They don't care necessarily about optimizing the amount of muscle mass they have and lowering the amount of body fat they have. Then definitely it's an okay approach to go for something more like a habit-based diet. Habit-based diet is something where you look at simply the outputs of a diet, right? So you look at the various habits that are generating a certain output. So let's say for fat loss, the goal is to get between 0.5 to 1.5% of body weight loss per week while you're also training to retain your muscle mass, right? And also eat high protein. So a habit-based setup would be simply being, hey, eat protein with every meal every day, right? Or have 2 cups of veggies, 2 cups of fruit every day, and have these foods at this time, right? You generate a habit, you generate routine, and then you measure just simply the output. So you don't measure and track the inputs, you measure the output. So you measure if you're getting that weight loss per week. If not, then you change a habit. And this is definitely a viable approach for people who don't want to track calories, they don't know how to use the apps. I mean, I did have clients who, like, they're super against tracking macros, and that's fine, but in general, I would say that this approach will not only not yield the most optimal results, but the problem is that even if you get the results, you're not sure how the process went down, right? So you're not sure what happened. And that's a problem if you go off the habits. Like if you go traveling, if you change your environment, and if you change your situation, you're not sure how to deal with it. And all sorts of these new foods are coming in, you don't know how to change that. You're not really flexible as a person, you're not being like resilient toward like all these changes in your environment. That will kind of screw up this whole approach for an extended period of time until you build up the habits again, and that's a problem, right? While on the other hand, if you compare that to tracking calories and macros with MyFitnessPal, there's like a whole database of foods, and anywhere you in the world where you find yourself, like for example for me, last 3-4 years I've been to more than 40 countries, and any country I'm in, I can simply scan the barcode, or if I don't know, if there's no barcode scanner, I can simply type in the food, and I'm gonna be getting a rough figure of how many calories that food gives me. And not only that, I know how many calories I can eat to get to my goal. And I mean, people will really overestimate how long this takes to learn. And it's simply a skill that takes a couple of minutes a day. After a couple of weeks where you invest in research and you get like a bit of a hang of an app, right? It's the same the first time you install fucking Instagram or Facebook. You know, if you never use it before, you know, it's gonna take a little bit of time. I mean, and then you kind of get a hang for it, and it becomes like second nature. Same is MyFitnessPal, same is tracking these apps. But again, I mean, if you're super against that, there's the habit-based approach, which simply relies on routines, right? And it relies also on your food availability, that you gotta have things that are repetitive, right, in order for that to work. And it's a viable approach. I mean, you can get really, really lean with that. But the thing is, you can't optimize. You know, the people want the best of both worlds. They want to optimize, they want to get the maximum results, but they don't want to put in the effort. And that is something you can't do, right? You have to sacrifice a little bit of time into learning a skill if you want to get the maximum results. And we're talking about maximum results. But if you're okay with being like kind of, I would say, mediocre, and if you don't really want to push yourself to that level, a habit-based approach is really a viable option where you get enough high protein, you avoid processed junk food most of the time, you kind of keep an eye on that you get your veggies and your fruits, you make sure that your diet is mainly made out of whole unprocessed foods, which is simply the same thing you would do when you're tracking, but without tracking, you're kind of not sure, okay, what is this generating? You have to wait and really be tracking your weight on a weekly basis in order for you to know if that input will generate a certain result. So you can't really, I guess you have to trust the process, right? You can't really be sure for like a couple of days if what you did is true until you see that output that you generated for that week. And that is a bit of a problem, especially once you start leaning down, and it takes a degree of objectivity to continue leaning down, because your body will be fighting you for all those extra like kind of pieces of body fat that you want to lose. Your body will be fighting you for it, right? For every 1% that you reduce that, you're going to be like having a massive amount of resistance in terms of like hunger, like all these different signals that are coming at you, and you have to deal with that. And the way I found that it's the best to deal with that, it's simply when you objectively see, hey, I can incorporate some of the foods that are very high calorie density, and I can still get to my caloric goal. I can plan my diet a little bit ahead of time. Let's say if you overeat one day, you know, okay, I can reduce my calories the next day. I know by how much, and I simply can't tweak. I can make these minor tweaks to know because I have the data, right? But if you're going with a habit-based approach, you don't really have the data, and you're relying on high level of mindfulness. And mindfulness is quite tricky. I mean, some people can pull that off, but most people cannot pull the mindfulness off because they will lie to themselves. They will simply lie to themselves because we human beings, we suck at estimating how much we ate, and we overestimate how much exercise we did. And your mind will play tricks with you, and that's why I don't recommend this approach, because you like a lot of people that start tracking, that start working with me, they're gonna be like, holy shit, I mean, I didn't know that I ate so much. I didn't know what my calories were. I didn't know this type of food generated so many calories, right? And it is, I mean, there's obviously negative effects to tracking as well. You're definitely a little bit more of a control freak. You're a bit more obsessive. But in general, I mean, it's an approach. Once you master it, it's going to yield you better results, and it gives you more control. And more control will ultimately generate less stress, because you have to make decisions, but you at least have the data, right? When you're going about mindful approaches, simply as a habit-based approach, then you don't really have the data. So you have to rely on habits to hold everything together, and that is very, very tricky. So some of the habits that I would recommend, I mean, this is a how-to video at the end. So some of the habits that I recommend is like eating protein with every meal, right? That would be a habit-based approach. Other habits that I would say, like eating vegetables with every meal, making sure that the 60% of volume on your plate is veggies, right? Getting carbs around the workout, right? If you're doing a habit-based approach. So things like intermittent fasting, they help a lot with a habit-based approach, because you're simply limiting to a eating window where it's going to prevent you from overeating. It's going to also be easier for you to manage hunger. So these are some of the habits that can yield those good results, even though you're not necessarily sure how many calories and macros you're eating, right? And the bottom line is really you have to look at the output. So this is an output-based diet, while the tracking calories and macros is the input-based diet. So when you're looking at the output, you really have to be rigorous with the output. You have to be consistent with your measurements. You don't want to have it fucking around with your weight scale, moving it around, using different kinds of weight scales, or things like not tracking at all, or let's say you weigh yourself sometimes with clothes, without clothes, sometimes after a meal, before a meal. This will all screw up your data and you will not be sure. And that's the only thing you have to really point out that you're getting to your goal or not, right? That output. So you really want to have multiple tools to measure your output, and I would say this is even more stressful than actually measuring things in the first place by using an app such as MyFitnessPal, but it's simply my opinion, right? And I would always say, as I said, the right way and the wrong way to diet, I made a video about that, is simply the point where you invest in skill sets, invest in knowledge, which will give you a return over a very extended period of time, versus simply trying to just make rapid decisions without having that knowledge increase, which doesn't yield a sustainable approach for the long run, right? That is the key, like sustainability. And I feel like flexible dieting and just simply investing that knowledge into managing your calories and macros and learning that will yield the most optimal results over the course of like your lifetime, where you simply learn how to manage your nutrition and you get this handled once and for all. So hope you guys got value out of this. Hope you learned a little bit about what does it really take to get sub 10% body fat level. As I said, measuring that output, making sure that you're on point, and that will yield the best results for sure. And on top of that, if you have any questions, as always, you can post that in the comments below. I've answered all the questions. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to click subscribe below to support the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.